Hey everyone, so this is the last four episodes of The Irregulars. So in episode five, kind of pick up where we left off, where B finds Sherlock on the. Well, we don't see her kind of bring him from the grave of her mother to the to a room in like a hotel or whatever. So, but essentially it picks up where that kind of whole episode left off, and or the episode four left off, and so she's interrogating him and stuff like that. And um, so basically, this whole episode is centered around how Charlotte knew her mother, and we come to find out that um, that when him and John Watson were, helping solving crimes, and eventually supernatural things start to happen, and um, so Sherlock is like, well, we need to bring in someone who has powers to help us deal with this whole supernatural element to these crimes, and and eventually, as they continue dealing with these supernatural crimes, Sherlock and uh, Jesse and B's mother, what was her name, Alice, uh, him and her fall in love, and that's how you know she got pregnant with Jesse, and um, they find out that Sherlock is Jesse's biological father, and so and then one night, they figure out where like they figure out that well, over the course of this whole um, fighting supernatural mysteries, um, they figure out there's the first rip that had opened, and they but then one night, they figure out where the rip is and go to try to close it, and what ends up happening is Alice is um, sucked in, um, and while Sherlock is trying to pull her back in, um, Watson is holding on to Sherlock instead of helping Sherlock grab a hold of Alice, and that's how she ends up getting sucked in, and um, all that stuff. So, um, and so over the course of this whole thing, Leo is um, trying to um, find a way out of the palace so that he can go see B and everyone else. And um, in doing so, he ends up jumping off of like the second story of the palace and hurting himself on his side. Um, and he's trying not to, like, when he gets to be Jess and everyone else, he doesn't want to let B see him hurt, um, which would end up exposing his hemophilia and all that. And but he eventually opens up to her, and they end up having sex that night. So going into episode six, um, they are called to go to a hospital, visit a hospital where patients have their body parts stolen. But the thing is, their body parts are already perfectly healed. Like a person has their like leg missing, but the the part of the the location of where the part where the like because it could be like mid thigh that the leg was taken, but in mid thigh the you know the where the kind of thigh ends, it's perfectly healed. And but it's actually like I think it was actually like the knee joint where the leg was taken, and so he like the part where the leg ends at the knee, it's perfectly healed. It's not like an open wound because this is like this is like 1880s, 1890s, essentially when this show was supposed to be taking place. So they didn't obviously have the best, medical care because they didn't have like ways of um, uh, like sealing the wounds properly and like wound properly back then. So um, they're surprised that the wounds were perfectly healed. So and then but and I forgot to mention that in episode 5 when Sherlock was telling B about how he knew her mother, there was a case that they were working on where the exact same thing was happening in episode 6, where people's body parts were being taken, and but their wounds were perfectly healed um, once they got like before they even got to the hospital. So and um, a sort of um, a sort of um, or a plant that was used in the kind of potion. I don't know if that's what you would call it, but like a serum or whatever that would help close the wounds. The plant that was used to help with that was called Snowdonia hawkweed, and Sherlock had correctly guessed that that's what was being used, but Watson had told him for no real reason as to why he is saying this. Watson says, well, it can't be that. But so in episode 6, we find out that the person who had um, taken those limbs and body parts um, 15 years prior was back again doing the same exact thing. Um, and she's using Snowdonia hogweed. So the person who's doing this her name is Edith Dubois, and turns out um, turns out that Watson had lied and said that it wasn't the Snowdonia hawkweed, because the reason why is because this Edith Dubois, her husband had contracted some illness. It seemed like they were alluding to the fact that it was like cancer or something like that. Um, and so she had gone to Sherlock and Watson, or specifically Sherlock, to help cure him of this illness. And when she had gone to Sherlock, he was entertaining guests um, and putting on like a performance of his abilities, deduction abilities, and or end his cases essentially. So I guess like the chambermaid or the maid or whatever comes up, tells Watson about the woman looking for Sherlock. So instead of interrupting Sherlock, Watson goes to talk with Edith, um, and says that he's unavailable. So instead of so he eventually says, "I'll talk with you," um, and not bringing in Sherlock whatsoever. So they meet up like sometime later, like whether it's a few days or whatever, I don't know. But they meet up at her house, and she's like, "Well, look, I found this relic um, that has powers to it, and I need help like um, figuring out what this relic is and how possibly it could help my husband." So he takes it and says that he's going to be back in a few days or he's going to call her in a few days to let her know what it is he thinks this relic is. But that never happens. Days turn, uh, time turns into days turn into weeks, um, and weeks turn into months. And so essentially, what ends up happening is he ends up he ends up opening the rip the last time with this relic, um, and and he unintentionally opened the rip because he was trying to contact the dead so that he could impress Sherlock essentially. Um, so um, that's how that happened, and but um, he, you know, eventually Dubois injects the serum to wake up her husband. What ends up happening is he wakes up. He's angry about the fact that um, she has kept him from essentially moving on, um, and he strangles her to death, which allows B, Jess, Billy, Leo, and Spike and Watson to escape. Um, and so after they have escaped, like, or before they go, confront Edith, uh, Leo is found by his royal footman, um, Daimler, um, and he's there to, take Leo back, but Leo threatens Daimler's job. Um, so he gets a reprieve for a second, or for a little while, but after they come back from confronting Judith, and Daimler talks with B privately, tells her that Leo's actually the son of the queen, and so she ends up kicking his ass out. Um, and so there's all that. Um, but before they B and him have this exchange, everyone's telling um, Jessie that she needs to confront her fears and her dreams, um, and she doesn't want to. So she and she's like, you know what, the Linden man was right. Um, you all don't really want. You're not really my friends and family. You just want to to cause me pain and stuff. So she runs out. Um, she runs out and um, she runs out and as she's walking away, she starts seeing dead bodies, strewn everywhere um, at the London port, essentially, like where the boats are and stuff. So turns out the Linen Man has arrived because early in a previous episode, I think it was like episode 4, he had told her that he was on his way to London, and um, and he has arrived that night, and um, so he's like, where's the rib? Where's the rib? Where's the rib? Um, but she says, I don't know where it is because I'm scared to go back in my dreams. And so he's like, well, clearly you're not as brave as I thought you were, and you're and all this stuff. And basically, he reveals to her his true intentions, which I was like, look, I thought something was off with him because I was like, this guy seems to be pulling and Mother Abigail. And if you know, if anybody who's watched The Stand, you know what I'm talking about. Where he was always presented himself in a place, like whether it's like outside of his house or steamboat that he eventually showed himself to be on. Um, the the places he's always presented himself to Jesse at, um, it's always been like a light, like the place was uh, white lighted, and it made her, it was to make her feel comfortable and safe to come talk to him or whatever. So I figured, he was just putting on a front because I assumed he was the one who had opened the rip, but turns out it wasn't really him. Um, um, but before we get to who it actually was, um, the last thing I want to mention about episode 6 is uh, Billy is that Billy the last couple of episodes was upset about um, his B's and Jesse's time and a workhouse where the man operating the workhouse um, would beat B, and pretty badly at that. So he had always wanted to confront this workhouse man to get revenge. And um, turns out, I can't remember if it was episode 5 or it was like episode 6, but eventually, he sees the workhouse man walking down the street one day, and wants to go confront him, but B, convinces him not to do that, because all that'll end up doing is, making him get in trouble, um, and he's gonna have to end up dealing with either getting hanged or killed or whatever, or be put in prison because of what he did. So, um, but when everyone scatters after they can try to get Jessie to go back into her dreams, he leaves as well, and he is confronted by the workhouse man. So what ends up happening is they end up fighting one another, and Billy ends up accidentally killing him and is taken to jail. So going into episode 7, um, with Billy in jail, Spike ends up um, getting him out eventually. Um, and Also, the Linen Man had trapped Jessie in her nightmares at the end of episode 6. And so she's trapped in her nightmares while everyone else is like scattered everywhere else. Um, so eventually, um, they figure out that this Linen Man is the one that um, trapped her in there, and that he's planning on entering the Birdman from episode 1, his memories, to try to locate Rip. and essentially start like a new nightmare world where he's a god and the normals are their his prey essentially. So um, so they end up they try to stop him. Like everyone tries to stop the Linen Man from um, going getting the location, but he ends up getting it, and um, um, he they but you know he ends up escaping with Sherlock with the location of the rip, and so him and Sherlock go to the location of the rip, and um, but so B um, Billy, Spike, and Leo all go back to Jess, manage to get her untrapped from her nightmares. And she tells them, the location of the rip is the inner circle railway line. Um, so going into episode 8, um, they all go to travel to the underground part of the railway station and approach it. But on the way to the rip, the Linen Man figures out that um, they're there. And the reason he figures out that they're there is because in episode 7, he had touched um, B because he's also a Sisymus. So he touched B to sort of um, figure out her inner monsters or inner um, nightmares, essentially. And her fears center around essentially not having her mom around. Um, and like the last day that her mom was there, and um, so she ends up seeing kind of like waking visions of, or waking nightmares of her mom leaving, and so she's crying out, and that's how the Linen Man ends up hearing that they're there. So when they're in the sewers and stuff, so he touches everyone else to get them to have like waking nightmares about specifically what their fears are. Um, obviously Leo's is the fact that he's gonna bleed to death because he has hemophilia. Um, Billy's is, I don't think they even show Billy's. No, they did show Billy's. They showed the what you call it, the house worker man, uh, and the fact that he taunts Billy and stuff like that. But they don't show Spike's because they just show him, looking afraid and all that stuff. So they don't necessarily show his, but we find out later what it is. It's the fact that he was scared that Jess would be hurt, and he wasn't there to help, essentially. Um, so before the Linen Man can, touch um, Watson, he shoots at the Linen Man, which makes him run away. So Jess, confronts the Linen Man, enters his memories, and is turns his trying to get into her memories onto him, and says, you can't cause people hurt, and you can't torture others without feeling a piece of that himself. So she manages to get him to feel the hurt that he's inflicting on other people, and eventually, he loses his balance, falls from like a little cliff, um, or a little ledge, and he eventually dies, which causes everyone else to emerge from their illusions and reunite with Sherlock. And he's the reason why he left with the Lindemann Man is because the Lindemann Man promised Sherlock of seeing Alice again. So as everyone watches the rip grow, Alice emerges from the rip, and it's found out that she was the one who had opened it up. This time to reunite with Sherlock, um, um, to be reunited with Sherlock, B, and Jesse. So Jesse's trying to close the rip, but Sherlock and B are like, no, we want her to stay because um, closing the rip would send Alice back to where she was, which was in purgatory. Um, and so Jess um, takes B back to the happier moments to some of the happier moments in her life to make sure to get her to let her close the rip, and it works. So she closes the rip, and as Alice, re-enters, Sherlock goes in after her, um, but Watson stubbornly grabs onto Sherlock because we find out in the previous episode that um, he is in love with Sherlock, like in love with him. So B grabs onto Jess because the rip is starting to try to pull her in, um, and she pleads with Watson to help get Jess back in, to not get swallowed up into the rip, and Watson lets go Sherlock to help save B or Jess, and the rip's closed. Um, Sometime later, like whether it's the next day or whatever, um, London returns to normal because while that whole thing was going on, the rip was causing people to become monsters essentially and kill other people. So London returns to normal, and they celebrate. Um, Leo, eventually gets to be alone to tell her that although he loves her, they can't be together because he made a deal with his family that he would marry um, this princess named Helena Augusta. And I don't remember if they said that was her cousin or something, or his cousin or something. But I think his foot man said something about that being his cousin or some shit. And the reason why he agreed to marry her is because if they didn't save Billy from jail, he wouldn't marry her. So they have to kind of say goodbye. Um, so B goes to Watson's house and breaks down about the fact that they both lost people that they love. So that's essentially the last 4 episodes of The Irregulars. Um, and honestly, I didn't really have that bad of a time watching those 4 episodes. I definitely think there's a shift in how the episodes feel because I got the impression that the people who worked on this show weren't sure if they were going to get a second season. So they kind of shifted their their focus on how to end this up properly in the off chance that they didn't get a second season. So it just got they kind of went away from doing the episodic um, murder mystery. Like each episode had a specific murder mystery that had a supernatural element to it, and they went from that to making sure that they focused on how to close this rip that was open that causes changes in people. So they wanted to get away from that so that they can focus on closing up the storyline in a way that was um, in a way that was good for the story, because if they had tried to keep the episodic sort of murder mysteries going and they didn't really get anywhere to how to sort of close this rip that happened, um, then and they weren't renewed for a second season, then people were going to end up getting upset about the fact that um, about the fact that they didn't anticipate them not getting a second season, so they didn't try to even wrap up those storylines properly. So it was, I feel like it was a kind of a lose lose situation on their hand, because on one hand, they closed the storylines properly, but people are saying, well, the second half wasn't nearly as good as the first half. But I think they did a good job with the second half. I think the thing that people were upset about the fact that it didn't have the episodic mysteries, the specific mysteries contained to one episode, and so because they liked the fact that they had like a mystery in each episode in the first four episodes, and so they liked that whole feel to it, but they um, they couldn't really continue doing that, because like I said, they had to close the storyline up somehow in a decent way, and how they did close it in episode 8 was, I think, good. Just an off chance, like I said, that they weren't going to get a second season, and they wanted to make sure that they didn't leave on a cliffhanger, because if they left on a cliffhanger, that's the other kind of side to the coin, that people would have been upset that they didn't leave, that they left on a cliffhanger, and now because they're not there for uh, they're not greenlit for a second season. Well, now you kind of screwed fans over of the show, because now we're left wondering like what happened to everybody and all that stuff. So it's like they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. So essentially, I mean, personally, I liked it. I mean, it was just the fact that um, I think it was mainly because of the fact that the show had a tonal shift to it, where they weren't focused on the focus on a specific mystery or a specific case in each episode, and that's what they didn't like about the second half of the season. But like I said, it was the only way to really um, close up to have a tonal shift and make sure that they focused on closing out the storylines properly. Um, Specifically like the rip. That was the only way they could really kind of wrap the storylines, because I believe that they didn't know whether they were going to get a second season or not. I don't think they knew, because um, I mean I've read where I've read other people mention about how this type of show is hard to produce because of the cost of supernatural showing supernatural elements, and um, and it's hard to produce that kind of thing, especially when you don't know if you're gonna if you're not especially if you don't know if you're gonna have longevity, and so I think it was smart on Netflix's part to have a tonal shift in the episode, so that way they could wrap up the storylines in the options. Like I keep saying, they didn't get a second season. So personally, I like the entire season. Um, and the way they wrapped up everything was good in my book. A little sad that Leo and B weren't, you know, able to um, officially be like, together at the end, but you know, I'm okay with it for the most part. Um, so um, again, just thought that it was better to finish it up the way they have, so that way, you know, it's not one of those seasons or one of those shows where they end up in a cliffhanger and now you don't know what the hell happened to the characters and stuff like that. So um I mean, if people are kind of disappointed with how they ended things, that's their right to feel that way. So but I am a little bummed that they didn't get a second season, because I think with a show like this, you can get at least 2 seasons out of it. Um, I don't think you can have longevity, because eventually, stuff like this can tends to you end up having to kind of repeat certain things. So I don't think having more than like 2 seasons out of a show like this is beneficial. But I do think that they could have at least gotten a second season out of it. Um, Maybe it's just because of the fact that not enough people watched it, and that's why they didn't get greenlit for a second season. Who knows? Or maybe it's because people were saying the second half wasn't as good as the first half. Who knows? I don't know, but um, but I'm overall happy with how they ended things, though. So I'm not gonna, you know, harp on it. So, with that said, that's all I have.